When should you start Social Security? This is probably a question you've been thinking about as you get closer to retirement. And it's a question that I've found almost everyone obsesses over. In my time as a financial advisor, I've seen people with $5 million saved stress over this decision the same way I've seen someone with $500,000 or less stress over it. Everyone wants to get it right because you've spent the last 30 or 40 years paying into Social Security. And at the end of the day, you want to make sure you're making the most of the benefit you've worked all those years to earn. But here's the thing about Social Security. There isn't one perfect age to start it. And if you're watching this video and you have $1 million saved and a pension, I think your Social Security decision should probably look very different than it does for the average retiree. Because think about what you have that most retirees don't. You already have a source of guaranteed income coming from your pension. And because of that, you may have options that the average retiree simply doesn't have. And at the end of the day, your pension gives you more flexibility when it comes to this decision. And that's what I want to walk you through today, because I don't think your Social Security decision should ever be made in a vacuum. You need to be factoring in many other areas of your financial plan when making this decision. So today we're going to look at the major factors I think you need to consider before deciding when to start your Social Security. And by the way, if you're new here, my name's Ryan. I'm the founder of Denali Financial Group, and we specialize in helping people with over $1 million saved and oftentimes a pension experience retirement as it was meant to be. And one of the things we stress all the time with the families we work with is that retirement planning is about so much more than just your investment balance. And that's why we plan around what we call the 5 worlds of retirement planning. It's your income, your investments, your tax planning, your healthcare, and your legacy. Because a decision you make in one of those areas can have a major impact on all the others. And Social Security is a perfect example. And by the way, if you'd like to get a better idea of how prepared you are across all 5 areas of your plan, we've created a retirement readiness quiz. It takes less than 3 minutes to complete. I'll put a link to that in the description below. But all right, let's jump into factor number 1. And the first thing I want you to think about is the fact that Social Security should be a joint decision between you and your spouse. And really, you need to think about what happens to your spouse if you were to die first. And I know it's not a fun question, but it's important. And if you're single, obviously this section isn't going to apply to you the same way. But if you're married and you have a pension, I think this needs to be one of the biggest factors in your decision, because there are really 2 decisions that need to work together. First, you have your pension election, but you also then have your Social Security decision. And I see people make the mistake of looking at these as 2 completely separate decisions. They'll ask, which pension option gives me the biggest monthly check? And then separately, they'll ask, well, when should I start Social Security? But I don't think you should make those decisions in 2 separate boxes, because both of them determine how much guaranteed income your household has today, but more importantly, how much guaranteed income you guys will have later, and specifically how much the surviving spouse has later in life. So let me give you an example. Let's say you're married and retiring at age 62, and you have a pension that's going to pay you $5,000 per month. But in order to receive the full $5,000, you elected the single life option, meaning there's no survivor benefit attached to it. Then you and your spouse both decide to start Social Security at 62. And let's just say you're receiving $2,000 and your spouse is receiving $1,800. So at the beginning of retirement, things look great. You got $5,000 coming in from the pension, $3,800 coming in from Social Security. That's $8,800 per month of guaranteed income. That's over $105,000 per year. And maybe that's covering almost your entire lifestyle. So you look at your $1 million portfolio over there and you think, well, we're barely going to have to touch this money. And that is great as long as both of you are alive. But now let's say you're the pension holder and you pass away, and that $5,000 pension disappears because you elected a 0% survivor benefit. And with Social Security, your spouse doesn't continue receiving both checks. The surviving spouse will end up with the higher benefit they're eligible to receive, which means now they keep the $2,000. So they could potentially go from approximately $8,800 per month of household income down to $2,000 per month. Think about that. We just went from more than $105,000 per year to $24,000 per year. And suddenly that $1 million investment portfolio has a lot more pressure on it. Before, you barely needed to touch it. Well, now the surviving spouse may need to withdraw more than 4% just to maintain the same lifestyle. And that can put an enormous amount of pressure on the plan. So when I'm helping a married couple think through Social Security, I'm not just looking at how much income we can create while they're both alive. I'm asking, what does this plan look like when there's only one person left? And this is where your Social Security decision can become really powerful. So let's talk through some ways to avoid this scenario. First, let's take that same couple. Maybe instead of both spouses starting Social Security right away at 62, we decide to start one earlier, but allow the other one, maybe it's the larger benefit, to continue growing. Now we're intentionally creating a larger Social Security benefit later in retirement. And again, this matters because that larger benefit might eventually become the main source of income the spouse relies on. And our entire reason behind delaying Social Security is because we're trying to create a larger guaranteed income floor for whichever spouse lives the longest. And that is a completely different way of thinking about the decision. But there's another way we could approach this. Maybe instead of taking the full $5,000 pension with no survivor benefit, maybe they elect a survivor option. And let's just pretend the 100% survivor option reduces the pension from $5,000 to $4,300 per month. I'm just using that number as an example. The actual reduction is going to depend entirely on your plan. And now they have $700 less coming in every month while they're both alive. But if one spouse dies first, the survivor will continue receiving the full $4,300. So suddenly the survivor scenario looks completely different. Or maybe because we protected more income through the pension, we don't feel as strongly about maximizing Social Security. So it's possible now starting Social Security earlier makes sense. Or maybe the numbers tell us delaying one benefit is the better strategy. But this is why we have to model it out. If you're married trying to decide when to start Social Security, don't just run the plan assuming you both live until 90. Run other scenarios. What happens if you die 5 years into retirement? What happens to your pension? What happens to Social Security? How does that impact investment withdrawals? And does my spouse still have enough income to live the retirement we planned? And after running through scenarios like that, it can help you make a more clear and confident decision knowing that you factored in multiple scenarios. All right, let's move on to factor number 2. And the second factor I want you to think about is something that I believe is one of the biggest weaknesses of many pensions. Does your pension have a cost of living adjustment? Because having $5,000 per month of guaranteed pension income sounds incredible today, and it is. But if that $5,000 never increases, you have to think about what that income is going to be worth 10, 20, or 30 years from now, because inflation doesn't stop just because you retire. And let's go back to our example. You retire with a pension paying you $5,000 per month. That's $60,000 per year. If that pension doesn't have a cost of living adjustment, 20 years from now, you're still receiving $60,000 per year. But assuming 3% inflation, that $60,000 would only have the purchasing power of roughly $33,000 in today's dollars. So the check still says $5,000 every month, but what the $5,000 actually buys you has changed dramatically. And this is where Social Security can become really valuable, because unlike a pension that stays flat, Social Security receives cost of living adjustments. And if you have the financial flexibility to delay it, you're potentially creating a larger guaranteed income stream later in retirement. And this is where I want you to start to think about the role each income source you have plays. Maybe your pension's job is to provide the income foundation during the early years of retirement. It's $5,000 per month, it's guaranteed, it's covering a significant portion of your lifestyle, but we know that pension isn't going to grow. So maybe we don't need to turn Social Security on immediately. Maybe we use the pension along with strategic withdrawals from our investment portfolio to bridge the gap for several years. And while we're doing that, we allow Social Security to continue to grow. Now, fast forward to your 70s and 80s, your pension hasn't changed, but now you've created that larger Social Security benefit, and that benefit continues to receive cost of living adjustments. The two income sources are doing different jobs. The pension helped give us security early, and Social Security is helping provide more inflation-adjusted guaranteed income later. And I think that's an incredibly important consideration for someone with a pension. All right, moving on to factor number 3, and that is the tax planning window. Now, let's go back and look at that same situation differently. They retire at 62, the pension starts, but they don't immediately start Social Security. Well, now there's probably going to be an income gap, and most people look at that income gap as a negative. But I don't necessarily look at it that way, because if you have $1 million or more sitting in tax-deferred retirement accounts, that gap may create an opportunity. Maybe we start to intentionally take money out of the IRA to help fund your lifestyle during those years. Let's say you need $30,000 from the IRA to cover the spending. But after we look at your tax bracket, we determine there's room to move another $40,000 or $50,000 out of the traditional IRA at a tax rate we're comfortable paying. And that's where we're gonna do incremental Roth conversions. So now we're accomplishing several things at the same time. First, we're using the IRA to bridge the gap while Social Security continues to grow. We're intentionally reducing the amount sitting in the tax deferred bucket. We're moving money into a Roth IRA where future growth and withdrawals are tax-free, and we are working towards reducing the size of future required minimum distributions as well. And this is exactly what I was talking about at the beginning of the video when I said your Social Security decision shouldn't be made in a vacuum, because on the surface, we're making an income decision. But that income decision just created a potential tax planning opportunity. And that's how all of these pieces start working together. And this is why I don't want someone simply saying, well, I'm 62, Social Security is available, I'm gonna turn it on. Maybe that's the right answer, but before we do that, let's understand what we're giving up by turning it on. Because once Social Security starts, we may have less room in the tax bracket to do Roth conversions. And what we are trying to avoid is getting to your 70s and realizing we had this incredible planning window in our 60s, but we never used it. Because now you could have a pension coming in every month, Social Security coming in every month, and required minimum distributions that you are forced to take, whether you need the money or not. And depending on the size of those accounts, all of that income stacking together can push you into a higher tax bracket than you are in today. And then it can even impact things like your Medicare premium. So when we make the Social Security decision at 62 or 65 or 67, I don't just want to know how much Social Security can I get today. I want to know, what does starting Social Security today do to my plan 10 or 15 years from now? That's the bigger question. Okay, so obviously a lot of what we just discussed revolved around delaying Social Security. And some important factors we didn't have time to touch on today are things like health and longevity. You know, do you have reasons to believe living into your 80s is unlikely? Well, obviously, that's probably a time where starting it sooner makes sense. Or there could be reasons like cash flow concerns. Maybe your spending is going to be really, really high early in retirement, and that Social Security is going to be super important in order for you to live the lifestyle you want to live. That's obviously going to be a factor here. But in today's video, I mainly just wanted to talk through how the decision for Social Security can impact other areas of your plan, and make sure that if you're someone with a pension, you're considering the entire picture when making these decisions. Now, if you're interested in working with a team that can help you run through scenarios like when to start Social Security, how Roth conversions will play into your Social Security strategy, or just really understanding how your plan looks when planning around all 5 worlds, schedule an intro call with me. In that call, we'll learn more about your situation and see if there are ways our team can help you maximize your retirement. Or if you'd like to identify any potential gaps in your current retirement plan before scheduling a call, I've also included a link to our retirement readiness quiz in the descriptions below. Like I said earlier, it takes only a few minutes to complete, and it's designed specifically for people with over $1 million saved who are approaching or are already in retirement. So if you found today's video helpful, I'd really appreciate if you subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you again next week.